Hi, I'm Bill Morse. I'm the president of Cartoonists Northwest, and I'd like to welcome everybody who's new to Cartoonists Northwest to their welcome for their first time. Cartoonists Northwest is a organization of professional illustrators, cartoonists, and all other visual mediums, as well as fans of the medium who are either just enthusiasts or trying to break in. And also we have, so if anybody wants to be be part of, want to learn more about it, there are several ways to do that. One, we have a Facebook group which acts as our forum, which I'll put the link on as soon as I finish talking and let Matthew speak. And also if I'm sort of regarding the Eventbrite list as a mailing list, so if anybody does not have objections, I can add your emails to our mailing list. Feel free to say if you don't want us to do that on the chat. Also, we have a part of the fun of this is we have a Best of the Northwest contest every month, which traditionally we would have had them on the table and voted on them, and the winner would be featured on our mailing, on our newsletter, Pen Stuff. Because we can't do that because this is virtual, the way we're working around that is to post it on our forum, on the Facebook group, which I've already opened up a thread for it, and the picture that gets the most likes will be the Best of the Northwest and featured on our on the newsletter. So anyway, and also the other thing, we're always looking for volunteers. So if anybody has suggestions for new speakers, which I'm always want to open for suggestions for new speakers, and or if you want to help with helping us come up with new events, help with our social media, you name it, by all means, let me know. The more the merrier. And so beyond that, I could go on, but time's a-wasting. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Matthew Southworth, who is best known for the comic book, as the artist of the comic Stumptown, which is now a ABC series, which is into its third season. Did I get that right?
Well, there's some news on that front. It would be into its second season, but it was actually canceled 2 days ago because of COVID. We were renewed and work was being done, but just with all the COVID problems, they couldn't get production going, and ABC decided to cancel, which may turn out to be a blessing in disguise, possibly, because we have the opportunity to shop it around to other places. But at the moment, we've just got the one season.
Huh. That's a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, it's this whole year it's been just another in a rotating punch in the gut,
Good way of putting it.
But to be totally honest about it, like I'm not devastated the way I might have imagined that I would be. Most of, like all of my work is basically opening the mailbox and getting a check and signing my name on the back of it. So like as far as what I was doing on the show, I wasn't really doing anything, but I'm still an executive producer on the show. But that just means I get checks. So while I'm sad that I won't be getting more checks, I wasn't as personally invested as I might have been had I been working on it continuously or something. So you know, we'll see what happens. I haven't lost all hope yet.
Okay, so as if you got in early, this is going to be pretty informal. So any questions you want to ask, just break in, and that, with any luck, won't interrupt your flow too much.
Yeah, no. I would love to answer any questions, and I think everyone will find that I tend to go on and on tangents. So while I don't have anything prepared, I'm sure I can find a way to fill the time. So yeah, thanks to everybody for coming. And I saw a number of names sort of pop up of people that I know. So I'm excited. I hope that you guys will ask questions so that I can see your faces. So as Bill said, I guess I'll give you sort of a brief autobiography. I'm Matthew Southworth. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and have kind of lived all over the country ever since. I went to school in Kentucky, then I worked in the theater in Louisville, Kentucky. Then I went to grad school for playwriting at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Then moved to Los Angeles, where I worked in the film industry at Paramount, primarily at Paramount, for 5 years. And then kind of burnt out on that, made a movie while I was there, burnt out on that, then moved to the Northwest to basically have a rock band, and wound up drawing comics. And I've been here now for 18 years. So, as Bill said, I co-created the comic book Stumptown, which was a TV series on ABC. And I'm working on some projects with Garth Stein, who wrote The Art of Racing in the Rain, and wrote this book, The Cloven, which is my new project. We have 1 volume out, and there's at least 2 more to come. So that's me. And here's my little attic cat, Sashimi. She's a stray that came to our house and moved into our attic. And now she's my best friend. And that's all I got. Thanks for coming.
Good night. No.
He doesn't like cats.
I got a question.
Sure.
I don't know if you've seen the who's the kid who played Harry Potter?
Daniel Radcliffe.
Daniel Radcliffe. You've probably seen Horns, right?
I haven't seen Horns. I know about it, but I haven't seen it.
I should tell you, I grew up in a town that was heavily into the pulp and logging industry. And I'm living in it now, or in another set of those towns. And more than other media, Horns gets that part of the society right. And Radcliffe does an amazing job playing the part. Of course, he's going to be our next Johnny Depp, get all the weird parts, right? And when you said, when I looked at the subject matter of Cloven, it was almost like, just popped into my mind, Daniel Radcliffe to play the guy, except he's probably too old, but
that's
he'd do a heck of a job.
It's also interesting that you bring that kind of issue up, because that's something that I've tried to do very, very consciously in my career. Was when I did Stumptown, which was set in Portland, I wanted it to be as real to Portlanders as possible. I wanted it to be just like Portland. So I went very research heavy. There's an issue that's a car chase. The whole thing is a car chase. And that you can actually drive that car chase. It's, if you're in that spot in the store, you look out your window and that's what you'll see in the panel. So I tried to do that, but then I also tried to do the same thing with the Cloven in a different way. This one was not as photo dependent, but there's a lot of it, like, takes place on Vashon. It takes place, some of it's in, like the Mountain Loop Highway is going to show up in the next book, and there's all kinds of stuff like that. And actually, one of the attendees of our event here today, Gary Straley, is is in this book. Um,
Huh.
this is him right here.
Yeah, it looks just like me.
Yeah. Yeah, he's in here a bunch, and actually, I
And
got to get you.
I'm waiting for the royalties for that.
Yeah, it's gonna buy you a house.
Can I ask a favor? If we all
Sure.
put this on speaker view, could you hold that up again? Because that'll give us a much better
How do we
view.
do speaker view?
Oh, it's up to the right. You've got the little symbols and things up there. I know they're all
Yeah.
different.
I'll show you
Well,
a
you're
few
on it.
pages.
Yeah.
Here's one of the spreads.
Oh, wow. That's gorgeous. Is this watercolor or is this
Some of it's watercolor. There's a lot of marker.
marker? Yeah.
The first few pages are almost totally watercolor, and then very quickly I was like, I'm going to spend the rest of my life watching water dry. So I've got to find a way to speed this up. And so
I wish you could have seen what just went on behind your back. Your cat just
did
did
the cat go
did
up
a
the
Batman thing up the tree.
Yeah.
Well, speaking
Yeah,
as a fellow
she's right there.
speaking as a fellow watercolorist, one suggestion I can make is a hairdryer is a valuable art tool.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
no, I definitely had that. Here's some more.
Oh wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
Uh,
Love the color palette.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of crazy about color, and I wanted it to be very. What I didn't want to do was a Pacific Northwest book that looks like it looks out here today. You know,
Yeah.
blue, gray. I wanted it to have a lot of color and a lot of, I don't know, just vibrance and.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about your color palette. Did you pre-establish ahead of time what your color palette would be?
No, no. I think of color kind of like, it's funny, the page I turned to really illustrates this. I think of color kind of like the music scoring a scene in a movie. So I try to make it, like what's a good example? Like if you hear a Wagner piece, Wagner is like lots of sort of violent color, and it's like it's explosive and visceral, as opposed to some kind something like Clair de Lune, which would be pastels and muted colors and things like that. So when I color something, I'm just trying to do that. Like, for example, here, there's no logical reason for this stuff to be red, or for that matter, for these weird rainbow effects around his head. But he's having sort of an emotional.
Fugue state.
Yeah, exactly. And late in the book, I mean, I almost don't want to show this, but I'll show it anyway. Well, there's a couple of things. One here is up on Mount Pilchuck.
Mm-hmm.
Much different kind of color treatment. And then there's this, which is basically the story of the book is this character, Tuck, is a young man with goat hooves. And he's felt like a freak all his life. He thinks he's, sort of a unique freak. Through the course of the book, he discovers there are more people like him. And then the question becomes, like, who are those people? And wait a minute, I've been told that my life was this, that I was born in this place to this woman, blah, blah, blah. And he starts to realize that everything he knows about his life and himself were all lies, which further isolates him. But at the same time, he finds this community of other Cloven. And so late in the book, there's this sequence, and it's going to be hard to hold up properly.
Cool.
And again, like the sort of ridiculously oversaturated color to kind of give that feeling of, you know, uh, it's a bacchanal of sorts, you know. I'll show you real quick. I have the original art for that. Hang on. This is the largest thing I've ever drawn. And it's just fun to show people because it's so ridiculous.
That's great.
Yeah.
It looks like a Rorschach block.
Yeah, it's a little it's nutty. So yeah.
You know, the book is beautiful, and I don't want to take away from anything about the book, but you've gotten tremendous press from KCTS. Is there a reason? I mean, is there anything that you did in order to get there?
No, not really. I think that the reasoning behind that is, one is that Garth, who wrote it, is a very successful writer. His book, The Art of Racing in the Rain, which I was not familiar with Garth when I first met him, and he talks about his success as, like, you know, it's the product of hard work, but he also recognizes, like, I just kind of hit the lottery. It just worked out. That book, The Art of Racing in the Rain, sold 4.5 million copies. And, you know, I see it everywhere. Every time I go to Value Village, I see another copy of The Art of Racing in the Rain. And I think the combination of that plus Fantagraphics is very dedicated to the book. Excuse me. They were able to generate enough interest in it that people want to talk about it.
That's great.
That is terrific.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice because there's so much more to go. Like, I hope we'll still get, you know, some attention for books 2 and 3 and possibly 4. As I mentioned before we got started, though, at least I think this was before we started, I'm having a hell of a time getting any work done this year. And I've been doing a little reading on why that might be, because I'm a procrastinator during the best of times, but this is a different thing.
Yeah.
I procrastinate, but I actually get my work done. And if I don't hit the deadline, I almost hit it. But this year, something else is going on. And I was reading about, you know, if you're taking a walk and you're thinking about what color you're going to paint your bathroom, do you want it to be more purple or more navy? Or do you want the trim to be white or off-white or whatever? And you're thinking about these things and you're making these sort of creative decisions, and then you run across a snake. All your mind does is goes, snake, 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 run, you know, or whatever. You can't think about what color the bathroom is anymore. And I think that with all the turmoil and, you know, with COVID and how that's affecting things like my mother's health, she's 79, I've just not been able to enter that sort of meditative space where I can actually do a whole lot of creating this year, which has been very frustrating. You know, never mind the fact that, like, it'd be nice to make some money. Fortunately, I had some money coming in from Stumptown, from the show. So I'm doing far better than a lot of people who have lost their jobs and lost family members. So I don't mean to complain about it, but it's been a very challenging year to self-motivate.
I appreciate your saying that, because it makes sense. And now I can understand a little bit more of what I've been going through too. So thank you.
Are you having the same experience?
Yes. And I allow everything else to get in the way of doing the creative things.
Yeah, I do too. And it's, you know, I can find a reason to be guilty about almost anything. So for a long time, I was just going, just do your work, you idiot. Like, what's wrong? Just get up and do the work. And finally, I was like, I don't think this is just me being irresponsible. And the more I thought about it, and then, like I said, did a little research, it was clear to me that not only are a lot of people experiencing this, it's it's a real reaction. It's a legitimate reaction to what's going on. But that said, I still got to draw the book sometime. So, you know.
Yeah.
Let me
So
say,
I have a question here, but
Uh-huh.
Stumptown, Portland, right?
Yes.
And you making it as real as possible. So do you think it's still the same Portland? So I moved there in 1980, right? And was
Right.
there for 10 years, moved away, and moved back to Vancouver in 2010.
Vancouver,
And,
Washington.
yeah, Vancouver, Washington.
Right.
Which, you know, and of course, you know, you can't go home again. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't my Portland anymore.
Right.
20 years later. So the Portland now, you know, today, 2020, and then the Portland and Stumptown, how close or how far apart do you think they are? And also, you know, that very experience when you move someplace, right? And it's new to you, you know, I mean, I think that sets like an indelible impression, you know, my Portland in 1980 is, you know, I mean, I'm still struck by sitting, you know, memories of sitting in the park block in October. And it's like, there's weather like this in the world.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about Portland now?
Well, I think about this a lot. Not specifically about Portland, but as I mentioned, I've lived kind of all over the country, and I'm writing my first novel right now. That's the one thing that I've actually done a little bit of, although I haven't written in over a month. My novel is set in Nashville in 1970, which is the year I was born. And Nashville in the 70s was still substantially kind of the old racist South. It was kind of shedding some of the, you know, there was still kind of de facto segregation in a lot of cases. Nashville is nothing like the South that I grew up in now. In some ways, it's the same, but certainly physically, it doesn't feel the same. So how that relates to the Portland thing, I haven't been to Portland this year. And of course, this has been quite a year for Portland with the Black Lives Matter stuff. And, you know, you would think if you're a regular viewer of Fox News, you would think it's war-torn Beirut in Portland at the moment.
Well,
But,
and I mean, having been a Portlander, it, you know, it doesn't surprise me at all, you know, in terms
right.
of, you know, there, you know, anarchism has always been strong. And,
Absolutely.
and, you know, now a couple of personal things I realize, it was always strong, you know, from the Wobblies and before.
Mhm.
And, you know, my personal connection to that is, you know, the last train robbery in the US that went so bad in Southern Oregon. That was a relative who was radicalized as a young man, sent to prison for a year. And so, yeah, that streak of Portland is not surprising at all.
No, I agree with that. I live in Everett now, where there was a famous labor strike.
Mm-hmm.
And I've spent a lot of time in Centralia, where there was also a famous labor strike and massacre.
Right, massacre or battle, whatever side, and it's not resolved yet.
No,
you know, in
no.
people's hearts.
It's that's one of the things. It's interesting because we're, of course, this is a Northwest cartoonist discussion. It's an interesting thing about the Northwest. There's a streak kind of running up I-5, you know, of labor struggles, and you know, like my father was involved in some labor struggles. I believe this was before I was born. I was certainly too young to know what was going on. My dad was a mechanic, and he worked for a trucking company. I told you I could go off on a tangent. He worked for a trucking company as a mechanic, and then there was a strike, and right at that time he was promoted to being a foreman. So all of a sudden he was on the opposite side from his friends who were now striking, and there was, they threatened to turn his truck over with him in it and all this kind of stuff. And so
this would be the Teamsters.
I assume so. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, but to answer your question, Portland is definitely different from 10 years ago when I drew the book. So no, it does not feel the same. Geographically, we have these kind of prefab condos everywhere now. And if you go to Capitol Hill in Seattle, I mean, looks vastly different than it did 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And I just drove through Bothell today, and Bothell, I actually got lost. I've never gotten lost in Bothell. How do you do that? But I did. I couldn't figure out how to get back to where I was going. Kenmore doesn't look the same. Everything has changed so drastically, and of course, the socio-cultural landscape is so different too than it was 10 years ago. I'm sure if we were doing that book now, I would be trying to reflect those things in a different way.
Well, and everybody who was part of the cartoonist community at that time. I mean, I left Portland before there was a cartoonist community, right?
Right.
Dark Horse was still publishing in black and white at that time, I think, by the time I left, right?
Yeah.
So everybody who was part of that, has come, 20 more years, 30 more years added to their age. And, you're not the same person that you were at 20 as you are at 30, 40, et cetera.
Yeah, certainly.
And so,
Matthew, excuse me. Sorry.
Oh, go on. I can wrap this up.
Okay.
Go ahead, because I'll wrap it up.
Oh,
I think we've rambled
to
on
ask
this.
a quick question.
Sure.
Everett's my hometown, and my dad was in trucking, and he was a Teamster. So I just wondered if your dad knew a guy named Don Colbert, because that's my dad.
It's possible that he did, but no. My dad was in Tennessee, in Nashville.
Okay.
And my dad actually died when I was 16. So
you're living here now. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Where in Everett did you live?
I actually lived on Mukilteo Boulevard between Everett and Mukilteo, and
that's where I live.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah. The little grocery that's kind of right there on the border.
Yeah.
I live.
It's still there?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
in
my
fact,
God.
it just got robbed the other day.
Ball's Grocery?
I think it's called Sound View something.
Okay,
something
it used to be called Ball's Grocery, and it was owned by a guy named, his real name, Harry Balls.
Yeah, no,
Not
now
making that up.
it's actually owned by a guy who lives in our neighborhood. I live on Ocean Avenue. I don't know if you know Ocean Avenue, but
Well, I don't know if a lot of it was built back then. The way it looks now, from what I've seen the few times I've been up there, what it used to look like, it makes Clallam Bay and Forks and those places look like metropolises.
right.
This used to be empty
Right.
back
Yeah.
then.
Oh, so
Yeah, no, I live almost on real close to basically the bridge where Everett becomes Mukilteo. So
Yep, and
Yeah.
sorry to break in here. I got a question texted from Kamiko Sato, and they asked, I met you at I Like Comics Comic-Con, and with conventions off the table now, how has that affected you much? And she thinks this video chat is a good alternative for the time being.
yes, it's affected me enormously in that I'm sure just about everybody in this chat knows, like, you work by yourself all the time. And I have family here in the house with me, but besides that, like, I don't see anybody most of the year. In fact, many of my friends, most of my band friends from when I was playing in bands for so long, they've moved. So kind of the only time I routinely see friends is at conventions. And, Twitter is kind of a poor substitute for that. not going to conventions hasn't affected my finances in any particularly negative way, though I would have been making money at conventions. But the lack of social interaction and just the dopamine boost you get by meeting hundreds of people who like you, I miss that a lot. Oh, I can see she's back up there behind me.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, for me, for the kind of work that I do, I think a lot about location and sort of cultural history of a place, or at least that's what interests me, more than I've never been a particularly good superhero artist. I did some of that stuff for a while, and I always felt like it was like I was trying to dance to something that I couldn't catch the beat of or something. And I think that makes my work a little different than a lot of people, perhaps just because I'm interested in something broader, maybe. I'm not sure that it's deeper, but I'm interested in culture. I'm interested in personalities, running through culture. As I mentioned, I have a background in theater and writing, and I kind of come at drawing comics more like a writer than a quote drawer.
I think that's wonderful.
Well, thank you.
It brings to mind how Bellevue, Washington, I think was listed as one of the most diverse communities in the States because it has so many different people from so many different countries there.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's interesting.
I love
yeah.
partaking of that.
Yeah, it's funny because, yeah, the Northwest is so white in a lot of ways. And I think about that a lot. Like, I mean, as I age, I'm becoming whiter and whiter. But it's not like I have all that much experience with other cultures in a non sort of European sense, I guess. But what I'm particularly interested in is how, well, kind of related to the Portland question, how what we think of as home is shifting and the color of it is changing and the texture of it changes. And then one day you go, whoa, like it's like somebody's coming in and repainting your house while you sleep. And one day you go, I didn't know that room was green. And one day you don't even recognize your house. I think that's an interesting thing. I feel like I'm not answering enough cartooning questions.
I have a cartooning question.
All right.
Now, I know you like to do research of the locale, but I'm curious, like in Cloven, how are you managing to keep hip, as it were, on current clothing styles? Are you going for specific age? I mean, do you look for old Sears Roebuck catalogs from the 70s, or what exactly, when you end up drawing a figure, how much of it is loosey-goosey, or I think I'll just draw this hoodie because I want to draw a hoodie, and how much of it is I really should put this guy in a set of Dockers?
That's a really good question. I'm, some people are tone deaf and some people are colorblind, and I'm fashion blind. I wear the same pants every day. I put on a button-down shirt today just because I knew I was going out in public. But so in most cases, I'm not paying a whole lot of attention to the fashion. I'm sort of, perhaps because of the way I dress, I just try and put people in things that seem sort of utilitarian for them. And like in the Cloven, for example, he's he's like a lanky high school kid. So I'm not as lanky as I used to be, but I'm just shy of 6 feet tall, and I used to weigh 135 pounds. And I was in my 20s when somebody told me, like, Matt, you dress like a fat guy. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it was because I always wore extra large clothes that were way too big for me. And I was hiding my body all the time. And so I kind of think of him, Tuck, the main character, as doing the same thing, because if I had hooves, well, to get super personal about it, I had acne on my shoulders and back. And so I was very, very self-conscious and kind of ashamed of myself. And I think of him as having the same kind of sense, although obviously having goat hooves instead of feet is worse than having acne on your shoulders.
Have you been around goats? Oh, sorry. Have you been around goats very much?
No. Years ago, I was doing a project about a donkey, and I spent I spent a day hanging out with donkeys, which was fantastic. Donkeys are so sweet. But no, I haven't actually spent any time around goats.
They're fun. They're so impish. I used to have pet goats.
Yeah.
And Mooksher one time got into the house and tore through the house and tore things off of the shelves in no time whatsoever. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's interesting because I have this children's book idea I've been playing with, which involves a fairy creature with cloven hooves. So I can speak from experience. I spent way too much time at the Woodland Park Zoo's petting zoo, and one thing I was interested in, having overthought how a bipedal digital digigrade biped would work. I was wondering just how much effort you put into the design on how it looks like it's not much more than it just being his foot. But
yeah, I thought quite a bit about that early on, and I finally just made a decision, which was that he needed to be able to pass as a normal kid most of the time, or normal young adult, whatever. And so I decided not to go that far down the rabbit hole of the real anatomy of something like that. He has these braces that he wears, and we sort of use that as a device. So when he takes those off, now it looks like he's got goat hooves. But when he's got those on, he just looks like a kid who maybe lopes when he walks or something. In the past, like if I had done this book 10 years ago, I would have driven myself crazy figuring that out. But it was such a daunting task to do 120 some odd pages that I was like, I've just got to make a decision and move on,
I'm stealing a question that I see in chat from David Lasky.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much it's covered, but I'm curious what Matthew did in his comic career leading up to work with Greg Rucka on Stumptown. I'd like to know.
I started, I guess it depends on how far back I start this whole thing. So I've drawn since I was 3, and I grew up across the street from this guy, Joe Casey. Joe and I made comics together as teenagers, literally in a closet under the stairs in my house on Fridays. We were such comics nerds, we were literally closeted. So I did that, then went on to theater school, didn't draw, got into music, was just kind of starting to draw again. But I intended to get into comics and write, because as I was working in Hollywood and working as a screenwriter, or trying to get work as a screenwriter, you would work on something and it wouldn't get picked up, or wouldn't get read, or if you did get lucky and it got picked up, that didn't mean it would get made. And even if it did get made, they might fire you from it, and it might, it was just this constant thing of Lucy pulling away the football, And I would look at Joe, my friend since I was tiny, and he was writing comic books. He was writing superhero comics for Marvel, and they would just come out. And I was like, whoa, like, you mean you don't have to go through 15 doors of rejection and blah, blah, blah. And so I thought I was going to write comics. But he just kind of subtly directed me to drawing them because that had been sort of our roles as teenagers and preteens. So that led into me getting into the business working with this guy, Stefano Gaudiano. Stefano at the time was the inker on Daredevil, and he lived and lives in Issaquah. And so I would drive out to Issaquah a couple times a week and work with him, and he would pay me to, you know, do sort of cleanup on pages, to ink backgrounds. Occasionally he would do things like he would have me ink a page and would pay me his rate for inking that page. And then often he would actually go re-ink it himself and fix all the mistakes and not tell me because he didn't want to hurt my feelings. He was a fantastic friend and mentor. And gradually, you know, like I picked up a lot of technique from him. And because we were working together on stuff for Marvel, I was meeting Marvel editors and some DC editors. I did a little bit of that. And so I would get little drips and drabs of things here and there. Like I worked on maybe 10 issues of Spider-Man in some capacity, where I'd do 6 pages here or 17 pages here. I think I did maybe 1 full issue. I honestly can't remember, but it was a lot of that kind of stuff. I began to be the guy they would call when somebody was way behind on a deadline, because I could get things done very fast and with a reasonable level of quality. I did an issue of Spider-Girl in 11 days, which looked terrible. That was 11 19-hour days, and it looks like it. But I did it, you know, so in 11 days I made whatever it was, $7,000. So anyway, I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And then what led to working with Greg was that Stefano had inked a book called Gotham Central that Greg had written. And when Greg decided he wanted to do the Stumptown thing, they contacted Stefano to see if he wanted to draw it. And he said, I don't have time to do it all myself, but I and my assistant Matt will do it together. And then literally a day into it, he was like, I can't do it. I don't have time. And they were just sort of left with me. And to be honest, I think they were sort of too polite to go, hey, wait a minute, this is not, you know, this isn't what we asked for. And I just wound up with the job and pulled it off. But I thought I was going to be fired for the entire first issue.
I'd like to ask a question about character design.
Sure.
I'm aspiring, trying to get into comic books, and my current hurdle would be consistency and just learning how to do characters. So I'm just working on that now. I got the Simpsons book on character design. I'm going to go through that, and I think Aaron Blaze had some real cheap video lessons since the pandemic, so I'm going through that. But I was just looking for suggestions or ideas on how you got better at character design.
Well, I'm going to answer you, but as I'm doing it, I'm going to move some stuff inside. It's starting to rain, so I don't want to get this stuff rained on. But I've still got my earbuds in, so you should be able to hear me.
Save the guitar.
Yeah, I would be devastated if I let everything get soaked. I don't care if I get soaked. The honest answer is I'm very inconsistent with that stuff. I can't seem to draw something on model unless I super simplify it. So, like in the case of the Cloven, I tried to design the character, most of the characters, like the one that Gary was cast as, I draw them realistically. But our main character, I do in an almost icon way. I I've simplified him so that his nose is, you know, it's almost like a lightning bolt shape. So I guess the answer that I would
you
say
mind
is,
doing a share screen of the main character?
sure, hold on. I just took him inside, but hang on. Yeah, he's, in fact, to the point of inconsistency, you can see on the first couple of pages. So this is page 2, down at the bottom here, this kind of greenish
Oh,
face.
yeah.
Well, very quickly I abandoned that approach, and he started to look like, let's see if I can find a good example here. Started to look like that.
Oh.
Much, much more geometric and simplified. And, you know, faces like this. And there are sort of, there were some kind of academic reasons for doing it that way. You know, Scott McCloud's book talks about that, and like that, you know, we look at Charlie Brown and we don't ever go, that's not what kids look like. That's not even what humans look like. You just go, hey, it's Charlie Brown. So I decided I was going to Charlie Brown my main character a little bit, see if it worked. And it seems to have worked. I haven't seen anybody respond negatively or say it was jarring in any way that he was less photorealistic, you know. But to the question of designing the characters, what I'm finding the more I do this stuff is the reader can tell when you're doing something that you're enjoying. And therefore, I think it's a good idea when designing a character to draw it as easily as you can. By which I mean, like if well, Charlie Brown's another example. Like, why not put him in a lightning bolt shirt with that black, you know, lightning bolt around it? And then, like, it's easy because you just recognize him every time, instead of going the other way and, like, what am I trying to say? I guess I'm basically saying don't work too hard. Make it enjoyable, and it will become more consistent just by virtue of the fact that you like drawing this person, and you'll be drawn to drawing them in the way that is most enjoyable, I think. Not sure that makes sense, but it makes sense in my head.
I'm taking notes. It's fine. Tintin, what they did, I think he did like real complicated backgrounds, but he really wanted to simplify the face so that people could put themselves into that position more. And that sounds kind of like what you're doing as well.
That's exactly right. And another great example is the great cartoonist Jacques Tardy. Tardy was I think he was Belgian. No, Hergé was Belgian. Tardy is French, I think. But same thing, like super realistic backgrounds, but the characters have these kind of bulbous potato-y noses and things like that. And it works. Like for a long time when I was younger, I would look at that stuff and I'd be like, why are you not trying harder on the characters? And I realized because that gives the reader room to identify with them.
Yeah.
I've noticed that with a lot of the French artists,
Yeah.
especially Valerian, where you grow up thinking it's super realistic, and no, he has his characters just as cartoony as a lot of the more humorous comics.
Yeah.
And let's see, I was being reminded that I need to start wrapping things up, but anybody else have any more questions for?
Yeah, I do. I was wondering if you could talk about why, and I have to admit I haven't read the book yet, but Gary Striley is in it.
Yes. So Gary, is your question is how did Gary wind up in the book? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, it is.
Well, Gary is also in Stumptown. So I used to be an apartment manager, and which, by the way, was a great way to get into comics, because basically your job as an apartment manager is to sit in your apartment all day. And Gary has a very distinctive look, as you may have seen on this webcast.
Oh, yeah.
It's also an extremely consistent look. I've seen pictures of Gary from the 70s, and he looks exactly the same, except his hair's dark. So I needed in Stumptown, I needed like this kind of thug character. And I just decided for fun I would cast Gary.
6:30.
And someone wrote in later and said they saw some photos of Gary in the back of the comic. I included some process stuff, and they said something about, it looks like Matt has found some sort of homeless alcoholic guy to pose for the thug. Gary's actually a soil physicist. So I always thought that was pretty amusing. So in the case of the Cloven, that character, whose name is Kenneth Langner, he's kind of the lead scientist that has been involved with the Cloven project and gene splicing these people with goats. And so I was like, well, who do I know that's a scientist? Gary. And to the question of designing characters, Gary is fun to draw. You know, he's got this great beard, he's got long hair, he's very recognizable instantly, as opposed to being, you know, just another George Clooney looking handsome lantern jawed guy. You've got a guy with different sort of beard shapes and things. So he's fun to draw.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. And I thank you for asking on Gary's behalf too.
So Matt, let me go back to something that you were talking about earlier that brought up something in my mind.
Okay.
You were asked about how you decide, you know, what clothes the characters wear. Do you research, you know, what's current hip trends, stuff like that? And what it reminded me of was something that somebody had said related to film when they were talking about animated films versus live action films. And they said that in live action films, what you see on the frame, a lot of it can just be there by accident, especially if you're in locations. You know, you know, there's things that are there. And yes, in live action, you have a set decorator and they pick items to put there. But a lot of times it's like, well, what might get picked was some interesting thing that was found somewhere. And it's like, yeah, we can use this. And stuff. He said, but if you're making an animated film, nothing just appears on the frame and stuff accidentally. It's the person has to choose to draw that and put that in there. And so in comics, I'm wondering, is it exactly the same thing? Is it something like everything that's in every panel there is something that you decide, oh, this has to be in there, or I want this in there, and I want this to look like this, and I want that person to be dressed with this? Or because of experience, there's some things that just flow out of you, like muscle memory and stuff. I said, well, I got to draw this. And so I just drew the room and I didn't put any super particular thought into what was sitting on that table or something like that. Or is it something that you really do decide about everything?
It's a little of both. You do have to make decisions, but there are times that, you know, it just sort of happens. You know, you think to yourself, like, well, there's a sequence in the book, for example, in a kitchen, and it's basically just blackness. It's like there's a kitchen table in the dark. It looks like a one-act play. That was deliberate. Sometimes those decisions are made, you know, because of, I don't know, economy. Can you still see me, by the way?
No, you
No.
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't think so. I just touched something and it just went dead on me, and I'm not sure why. But we'll see. See if I get it back somehow.
go.
there you
There
are.
we go. Um,
Not for me. Huh.
yeah, I'm back here on my side, so hopefully I'll turn up for everyone. I wouldn't want to deprive you of my beaming face. But yeah, so it requires, you know, you can drive yourself crazy trying to make a decision about every last thing in the room. And I've done that. So I've tried not to do that now. I'm trying to be a little more improvisatory about it. And sometimes with some success and sometimes not. Not sure that answered the question, but.
Well, yeah, I think it does, because I've noticed there's a lot of things that I don't think of consciously, that when it's over, it's like, oh, I didn't think about that consciously, like driving a car. It's like I'm so used to driving a car, I don't really pay attention to every move your foot from this pedal to that and turn here and stuff. But sometimes I'll drive and it's like, oh, I just drove the last several blocks and I really remember making the turns and, you know, and stuff like that. But I was doing it, but it's just because I was so used to doing it, I don't have to consciously make all these decisions, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a big part of it, is like learning, just like learning to drive. You know, I'm teaching Owen. For everyone who doesn't know, Owen is my 16-year-old sort of stepson. I'm teaching him to drive, and yeah, you know, a big part of it is you go like, look, I know you think this is hard right now because you're thinking like, I got to look over my shoulder to make sure I don't, you know, hit somebody in my blind spot, and I've got to put on my turn signal, and I have to regulate how hard my foot's going. But yeah, eventually it just becomes muscle memory. I'm trying to accept that in my work too, of like, you know, I don't have to exhaust myself every day. I used to think that if you weren't exhausted, you're not trying hard enough.
I have a question. This happened a lot with my work. I write on many different levels, but then it's like I write on like 12 levels, and there's people who get one level and people get all 12 of them. And then there's those people who would get 22 levels, and I would have to look at them and say, oh yeah, I meant to do that. So do you get a lot of those people saying, oh, you're such a genius, you did this, and you're going, yeah, I meant to do that?
Sometimes. Somebody was talking about, there was a review of the book, apparently on a podcast. Garth told me about this. I actually decided not to listen to the podcast for this reason. About how I had chosen the blue of the word balloons in the Cloven to reflect something that happens earlier in the book. And it was just absolutely not the case. I chose the blue because I was giving Garth black and white pages, and I didn't want to have my word balloons enclosed with a line. So I just needed to give them a color. I just made them blue, so they would sit on top of the black and white artwork and be readable. And then I just stuck with it. But when they said that, I was kind of like, well, that's kind of cool. Maybe they're right. Maybe that's why I did it. I don't know. So, you know, I've learned not to discourage people from calling me a genius.
The Pee-wee moment. Fall over and, yeah, I meant to do that, like a cat.
Yeah.
If I keep moving fast enough, nobody will notice.
Exactly. Yeah. That's my plan. I just decided to bring us over to sashimi.
There she is.
Yeah. Give us a little visual variety here.
She looks like a little owl.
Yeah.
So what's coming up next?
Well, you mean besides the apocalypse? There may not be a next.
Yeah, true enough.
What's next is volume 2 of the Cloven, which originally we had planned would come out next July. I don't know if that's going to be possible. But if I suddenly have a burst of focus, maybe it's still possible. I would like it to be. I'm also, as I mentioned, I'm writing a novel, which was originally going to be a comic and might still be. The company that I was going to do that for, because of the pandemic, sort of tightened their belts and kind of slowed down. So then it was like, that was probably not going to happen. But that's why I started writing it as a novel. So hopefully, that'll be in some readable form. It's called The Volunteer. It's about an alcoholic songwriter who stumbles into the mystery of the murder of his friend and winds up involved in a complicated Chinatown-esque intrigue in 1970 Nashville.
Let me ask you, will you continue to collaborate with, there's a writer and a cartoonist, a writer, an artist and a colorist. Are you going to continue that way? And can you talk about the collaborative process?
Sure. Well, in the case of everything I've done before, not almost everything. I wrote some stories for Dark Horse and did some things like that. But almost everything, I would draw it and then have one other role, which would be usually lettering. I would letter my own work, and then hopefully you guys will still be able to hear me in here. Let's see if this happens. So in the case of the Cloven, though, I did basically everything except write it. It was written by Garth, and I've had a better time collaborating with Garth than I ever had. Ugh, I hate this look at myself. Ugh. Yikes. I'm going to keep moving. We're just going to do the Matt Paces thing. Garth has been the best collaborator I've ever worked with. He's extraordinarily patient and supportive, and he seems to have no, I was going to say no self-doubt, but more than that, he seems to have no doubt in me.
Nice.
And I'm consumed with self-doubt. So to have someone who is constantly, he not only responds positively when I turn something in, he responds telling me I'm a genius and that, he's so lucky and blah, blah, blah. And that stuff is priceless. It keeps you going. So I certainly love collaborating with him, and I intend to continue to collaborate with him. But I also like, being the whole factory, the whole team. So it's interesting. This is the first year that this has happened. As soon as I just said that, I said, I like being the whole factory, the whole team. And I went, but I'm exhausted. And I think that's just by this year. I hope so. I hope I haven't, entered a place where I don't want to take on the responsibility anymore, because I'm still a control freak. I'm just a tired control freak this year. So.
Can I ask what else you did for Dark Horse? I'm looking at some Creepy.
Yeah.
I found something by Creepy. It's like you did some short stories.
Yeah, I did 2 stories in Creepy. One was about one of my other cats, this cat Skinny, who was a voracious, sickly cat who was always sick her whole life. And I just sort of made this story about a monster for Creepy. So it was like a good way to do a story about my sick, sad little cat. And then I did another story about a guy who was going blind. And then I did a project that was going to be printed in Dark Horse Presents, and Dark Horse Presents was canceled before it got printed. That was called Addressee Unknown. And at some point I'm going to do something with that. That story wound up being, I think, 24 pages. And that was purely me as the whole factory, coloring, writing, drawing, lettering. And that's the main stuff I did for Dark Horse.
Great.
Well, now that you keep mentioning cats, I think that you should listen to the Radio Lab episode from September of 2009 about parasites. It's pretty interesting.
Okay, I will. I love listening to Radio Lab. So yeah.
Great. Let's see. So if that's everybody, it looks like we're getting towards 0 hour. Any last minute things?
Sure. Can you talk a little more about first getting published?
In what way? What would you like me to talk about it?
How did you go about it? How were you successful first time around? How did it work?
That's an interesting question. I'll tell you what I did that was successful and was kind of smart, which I don't know if I've ever talked about this. I knew coming in that I had a different background than most people drawing comics. That my theater background was unusual, that I had worked in the film business, that I had a band. And so I sort of branded myself that way. I was like, I won't give you the same thing all those other dorks do. I'll give you something different. And it was true, but it was also calculated in a way. I was like, I need to take advantage of this. Because you could look at it as like, he couldn't make it in the theater business and he couldn't make it in the film business and he didn't become a rock star, so now he's drawing comics, which I guess is probably also true. But I decided to maybe look at it a little differently. But, you know, I had a leg up on getting published because I was working with Stefano. And since he had been doing work for Dark Horse, and everybody likes Stefano Gaudiano. Everybody likes him. He's one of the nicest people you've ever met. So he's got friends everywhere, and he's been in the business for a long time. And so I just kind of lucked into an association with this guy who introduced me to 1,000 people, and it just sort of worked out.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Hey, let me go back to something that I also just remembered. Earlier on, you were talking about this year being sort of tough to stay on track and keep creative because COVID is helping you to be more of a procrastinator and things like that.
Right.
And I can be a procrastinator too. And I notice that it's difficult now that I'm sheltering at home instead of working or something to be as productive as I think I could be. And it reminds me of a really great thing that I read that was written by a man who is a professor of one of the hard sciences at some university. And it was on his webpage, and he identifies himself as a procrastinator also. And he said the key for him is that he has invented this thing for himself, which he calls structured procrastination. And he says that basically, if you know you're going to procrastinate, you know, come up with a to-do list, and, you know, the things that are the most important and the most urgent, the things you have to do for job deadlines and stuff are up at the top, but you put other things down below, including things that you would really like to do, even if there's no reason that they have to be done.
Right.
And then whenever you're going to procrastinate, he said, don't procrastinate by just sitting around watching TV or drinking or something like that. Procrastinate by going to your list and finding out, well, here's one of these fun things that's sort of in my area or something that I would have never done because I don't really have the time and the job, but I'm going to do it. And he said he's done a number of those things, and it actually came out to be something that he wound up published, and people looked at it and they said, and they think I'm really productive, you know, for this stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is stuff that it's just, I'm procrastinating. I'm just doing my wish list stuff. And it allows you to stay creative and to actually get something done as opposed to just pissing the time away.
I think that's true. That's what happened with me building this guitar and writing. Like, it's funny because, like, on the one hand, I feel like I've accomplished nothing through most of 2020, and yet I've written 60 some odd pages of a novel. Never written a novel before, and I've built a couple of guitars. So I've done something, and I've drawn some. So yeah, I think that guy's on to something.
Yeah, I really like it. If I can get myself to do it. So far, I've been procrastinating about, I guess, putting together a structured procrastination list. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't convince yourself to make the list.
Oh, go Maureen. Oh, okay.
She asked if I played the
I
guitar.
have a question. It might be too odd, and just
Yeah.
say so. One of the artists I hang out with, who has a fairly convoluted way of working, but and an interest in theater, but when he puts it all together, he has this sense of a figure in space, which is astounding to me. You know, that you're sitting there and the human form is occupying that space. And also he can do that with the elements in the space, like it was a theater set, right? And that
Right.
Does that strike any chords with you, or sound useful to you, or that's that kind of comics as drama in space?
Absolutely. Somebody asked me a question about that the other day, just a friend of mine, about sort of how I approach a scene, and that's pretty much what I do. Is I don't literally think of it as actors on a stage, but like I was a playwriting and directing student, and so when you're breaking down a script to direct it, one of the first thing you do is you break it into beats. If it's a scene about a family saying goodbye to a dying father, let's say, you go, all right, well, there's the beat of everybody being polite to each other at the beginning, and then there's going to be the point where that starts to crumble and you see that there are some family tensions, and then there's the point when they go in to say something to the father and he's unconscious, and then there's the beat where maybe somebody sees that he's waking up, and that whatever, and you're breaking it into those beats, and then you block it. Again, if it's on stage, you block it. Well, I'm not literally blocking it, although I have done that before. Earlier in my career, I would literally do that in the script and block it just like it was a play, and then I'd figure out where the cameras would go. Now I do that kind of unconsciously. I put this person on that side of the room, and I put this person on that side of the room, and I know that there's a window behind that guy that needs to be relatively consistent, and there's a bookcase over there. And so I'm not thinking in flat images. I'm thinking in space, and then I try to compose flat images from where I am in the space.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, well, just you don't have to like explain it to me, because I have been talking to this fellow artist about what he's doing. I don't do anything similar to that at all. But we've had that discussion.
I think the important part of that for me was where am I in the space?
Oh, okay.
It can be you could very easily, block it like a play, as though you were sitting in, whatever, the fifth row, and you're shooting, quote unquote, filming the whole thing from a fixed point. But I don't think of it that way. I think, like, when I was a teenager, I saw this great film, Camille Claudel, which was about Rodin's lover, Camille Claudel. She was a sculptor.
Right, and Rodin was a jerk.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Uh, There's this
I
amazing.
I saw the same movie. So
Okay, great. So, it's Isabella Johnny, one of the most beautiful actresses in the world. And there's this shot, this scene where she's talking to her brother, Paul Claudel, who is a poet, and they're lying in bed together in a chaste sense. They're not
right.
sleep. And she lies down as she's talking to him. And of course, his face would be about here, like the back of his head is this. But I saw this in a theater with a huge screen in Nashville. And the power of Isabella Johnny's perfect skin and her kind of liquid eyes and just something that beautiful being 40 feet wide was so powerful to me. And it had this kind of effect on me of like, that scene was all about intimacy of these siblings, sort of sharing secrets, and that I, as the camera, was allowed in for it to be so intimate that I could see nothing but her face. That had a huge effect on me. So I think about that when I'm placing my so-called camera. Like, what am I conveying by being here versus being back there?
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. Well, looks like we're out of time. Thank you so much, Matthew, for a absolutely fantastic conversation.
Thank you.